The DNA results came back impossible. Dr. Anatoly Markov ran them 7 times. Same result. Every single test. The lab equipment wasn't malfunctioning. The samples weren't contaminated. The results were simply impossible. This suggests pre-Diluvian origin, he wrote in his report. His hands shook when he signed it. Genetic markers consistent with Genesis 6:4 descriptions. 3 subjects, all deceased, all measured at Institute 47, 70 kilometers, outside Almaty, in the winter of 1967. Heights 3.1 meters, 3.2 meters, 3.3 meters. Bone density triple normal human range. Blood proteins that don't exist in any known population. And something else. Something that got 13 people killed and buried this research for 57 years. Their language contained Proto-Hebrew roots from before the Tower of Babel. You're sitting across from someone who was there. Her apartment smells like old tea and something medicinal. Svetlana Petrova is 91 years old now. She was the night nurse assigned to the basement ward at Institute 47. She hasn't spoken about this since 1968. They made me sign papers, she says quietly. Gave me a pension from a department that didn't exist, told me to forget. But she remembers everything. There were 3 of them, she says. Men, but not men. Too tall. Their bones were wrong. When they breathed, you could hear it across the room. She sets down her teacup. Her hands shake. They spoke to each other, a language like water, over stones. Dr. Resnick brought in linguists. The linguists couldn't leave after that. The facility was supposed to study genetic anomalies. Officially, what it actually studied was whether the Bible was describing real events, whether Genesis 6 was history, not mythology. The answer was yes, and that answer had to be destroyed. Institute 47 sits in the foothills where the steppe meets the Tian Shan Mountains. The main building is concrete, 7 stories, Soviet brutalist architecture from 1961. There's a second building behind it, half underground. That's where the basement ward was. The windows are broken now. Grass grows through cracks in the foundation. But if you go down to the basement level, past where the doors were removed, you can still see the 3 beds. They're welded together from surgical steel, each one 4 meters long, bolted to the concrete floor. The restraint brackets are still there, though the leather straps rotted away decades ago. Svetlana worked here from 1965 to 1968. She was 34 when they transferred her to the basement ward. Number explanation. Just orders. Report to Dr. Volkov. Basement level, December 12, 1965. I thought they were bodies at first, she says. 3 shapes under sheets. But then one of them moved. She's quiet for a long moment. The tallest one opened his eyes. They were gray. Not like human gray. Like looking at granite. The 3 subjects had been discovered in the Altai Mountains in 1963. A geological survey team found them in a cave system, frozen in ice that carbon dated to 4,200 years old. Perfect preservation. Soviet scientists thawed them using techniques developed for mammoth tissue. They didn't expect the subjects to wake up. The first one woke up on December 18th, Svetlana says. He sat up. The restraints broke. Surgical steel. He snapped them like thread. Dr. Volkov sedated him immediately, but not before the subject spoke. One word, Svetlana says, sounded like Nephil. Dr. Volkov went white. He knew what it meant. Nephilim, the fallen ones. Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days, mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The Soviet Union was officially atheist, but the researchers at Institute 47 weren't studying mythology. They were studying something that matched biblical descriptions so precisely that coincidence became impossible. All 3 of them were over 3 meters tall, Svetlana says. Their bones were denser than ours. Dr. Markov said their bone structure suggested they could have lived for centuries, maybe longer. She shows you a photograph. Faded, edges worn. Taken through the basement window, 3 shapes visible. Too tall, too still. Dr. Volkov measured everything, she says. Height, bone density, cranial capacity, blood composition. Every measurement matched descriptions from the Book of Enoch, not the canonical Bible, the suppressed texts. The Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim as offspring of angels and human women, beings of immense size and strength, beings who taught humanity forbidden knowledge, beings whose corruption led to the flood. The second one woke up in January. Svetlana says. He spoke more. Dr. Resnick recorded it. Brought in linguists from Moscow University. Her voice drops. The linguists identified Proto, Hebrew, Aramaic, Sumerian, languages that shouldn't exist together. Languages from before languages diverged, before the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11 describes how God confused human language, scattering humanity across the earth. But these three spoke a language from before that scattering, a language that contained roots of languages that wouldn't exist for thousands of years. They told us things, Svetlana whispers. The third one especially. He spoke the most, told Dr. Resnick about cities. Cities that matched Tartarian architecture exactly. She's quiet again. He said they built them before the flood, before everything was destroyed. The weight of what she saw sits in the silence between you. She was 36 years old, trained as a nurse, raised in Soviet scientific materialism. Nothing in her education prepared her for men who should have been dead for 4 millennia, but were breathing, speaking, remembering. I asked Dr. Volkov if we should contact the church, she says. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. The church already knows, he said. They've been hiding this for 2,000 years. By March 1967, the facility had documented everything. Height, weight, bone structure, genetic markers, linguistic patterns, cultural memories. Everything that proved these weren't human, weren't modern, weren't supposed to exist. And everything that proved Genesis 6 was describing real events. That's when Moscow got involved, Svetlana says. Men in dark suits, they didn't wear uniforms, didn't give names. They read Dr. Volkov's reports. Then they made one phone call. She sets down the photograph. 3 weeks later, the subjects died. All of them. Same night. Dr. Volkov said it was organ failure, but their organs were fine the day before. The basement is colder than it should be. Even now, 57 years later, the temperature drops when you descend the stairs. The air doesn't move right. Something about the space holds on to cold. Dr. Yuri Resnick was the linguist they brought from Moscow. He's 87 now, living in a small apartment in Almaty, 3 kilometers from where Institute 47 stands abandoned. He won't go near the facility, hasn't been back since 1968. The first time I heard them speak, he says, I thought someone was playing a recording. Ancient recordings, dead languages. He was a specialist in Proto-Indo-European linguistics, published papers on language divergence patterns. When the call came from Institute 47, they told him it was a consultation on archaeological findings. They didn't tell him the findings were still alive. The middle one spoke first. Yuri says, his voice was wrong, too deep. Like hearing someone speak from inside a cave. He pulls out a notebook. The pages are yellowed, edges frayed. His handwriting covers every page, phonetic transcriptions, grammatical notes, desperate attempts to categorize something that shouldn't exist. I recognized Proto-Hebrew immediately, he says, but mixed with Proto-Sumerian, Proto-Akkadian, and something older, something I couldn't identify. He spent 6 weeks at Institute 47, recording, transcribing, analyzing. Every conversation deepened the impossibility. They described the world before the flood, Yuri says quietly, described cities, described technology, described their fathers, the angels who descended. Genesis 6:2, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. The tallest one called himself Azazel's line, Yuri says. Azazel, Book of Enoch, chapter 8, one of the leaders of the Watchers, the angels who fell. The Book of Enoch wasn't in the canonical Bible. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD removed it. Too disturbing, too specific, too dangerous. But Enoch 6:8 describes everything. The 200 angels who descended on Mount Hermon. Their oath to take human wives. Their offspring, the Nephilim, who grew to be giants. Who consumed all the food. Who taught humanity metallurgy, cosmetics, weaponry, astrology. Who corrupted the earth so thoroughly that God sent the flood to destroy them. They remembered it, Yuri says. Remembered the flood. The middle one described watching the water rise. Described drowning. Described waking up in ice. He's shaking. Do you understand what that means? They died in the flood. Genesis 6:7, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. They died. And somehow they woke up. The weight of knowing impossible things settles over him. He spent 57 years trying to rationalize what he documented. Trying to find explanations that don't require accepting that the Bible was describing literal events. He hasn't found any. I submitted my findings to Dr. Volkov, Yuri says, told him the linguistic evidence was conclusive. These beings spoke a language from before the Tower of Babel, a unified human language. Exactly as Genesis 11 describes. He closes the notebook. Dr. Volkov burned my reports, personally. Made me watch. Then 2 men came to my apartment. KGB. Told me I'd never worked at Institute 47. Told me I'd never seen the subjects. Told me I'd never speak about this. He looks at you. They killed Dr. Volkov 6 months later. Car accident. Killed Dr. Markov 2 years after that. Heart attack. killed 4 others I know about. Made it look natural. The silence that follows carries the weight of 13 deaths. 13 people who knew. 13 people who documented what they found. 13 people who proved the biblical Nephilim were real. I kept the notebook. Yuri whispers. I know I wasn't supposed to, but someone needs to know this was real. You're looking at Yuri's transcriptions when it hits you. The phonetic patterns, the grammaticals, the way certain root words appear in multiple language families simultaneously. This isn't just old. This is the origin point. Genesis 11:1. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Before God confused the languages at Babel, humanity spoke one tongue. The language Adam spoke in Eden. The language Noah spoke before the flood. The language the Nephilim would have spoken. And these 3 giants spoke it. Your hands are shaking when you see the connection. Every biblical timeline, every archaeological finding, every suppressed text points to the same conclusion. The Tartarian civilization wasn't destroyed by humans. It was destroyed by the flood, and the Nephilim built it. But if the Soviets discovered this in 1967, they weren't the first. In the Vatican secret archives, there's a restricted section, texts that require special permission to access, texts that churches have kept hidden for centuries. Father Domenico Rossini accessed them in 1952. He was researching connections between ancient megalithic sites and biblical events. The Vatican allowed his research because they thought the connections would be metaphorical. They weren't. I found documentation from the 1600s, Father Rossini says. His voice comes from a recorded interview, preserved by someone who interviewed him before his death in 1995. Jesuit missionaries in Siberia. They reported finding massive structures, buildings that matched no known architectural style. The recording crackles. But what disturbed the Vatican was the height of the doorways, 4 meters tall, too large for humans. The missionaries asked local populations who built them. The locals said, the tall ones who spoke to God. The Jesuits sent samples back to Rome, stone samples from the buildings. Carbon dating technology didn't exist yet, but the Vatican commissioned analysis. The stone showed tool marks that suggested advanced metallurgy, technology that shouldn't have existed in Siberia in ancient times. The church suppressed it, Father Rossini says. Suppressed all of it. Because if those buildings were real, if the Nephilim built them, then Genesis 6 was literal history. And if Genesis 6 was literal, then the flood was literal. And if the flood was literal, he trails off. Then the church had been lying about biblical interpretation for 1700 years. The recording ends. You're back at Institute 47, standing in the basement where the 3 beds remain. Father Rossini's research and the Soviet findings match perfectly. Massive structures, advanced technology, biblical timelines, beings who shouldn't exist but did. The Tartarian civilization wasn't mysterious. It was Nephilim, and both the church and the Soviets knew it. The basement feels heavier now, knowing what happened here, knowing what was discovered and destroyed. Dr. Helena Volkov was brought to Institute 47 in February 1967. She wasn't related to Dr. Volkov, who ran the facility. She was a biblical scholar from Leningrad University, specialist in ancient Hebrew and comparative mythology. She's 89 now, lives alone, won't give interviews, but she'll talk if you don't record, if you just listen. They told me it was a translation project, she says. Ancient texts found in a cave system. I thought it was Dead Sea Scrolls material, archaeological. She arrived at Institute 47 on February 12th. They took her directly to the basement. I saw them, and I knew, she says simply. Genesis 6:4, there were giants in the earth in those days. Not metaphor, fact. Dr. Volkov, the facility director, gave her 3 weeks, analyze everything the subjects said. Cross-reference with biblical texts, apocryphal writings, anything that might explain what they were. I started with the Book of Enoch, Helena says. Chapter 7, verse 2. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. An ell is approximately 45 centimeters. 3,000 ells is, she pauses, over 1 kilometer tall, obviously exaggerated. But Genesis 6:4 describes them as mighty men of old, men of renown. Numbers 13:33 says the Israelite spies saw giants who made them feel like grasshoppers. She pulls out a worn Bible, pages marked, annotated, cross-referenced, with decades of notes. What's not in the canonical Bible is more revealing, she says. The Book of Giants from the Dead Sea Scrolls describes the Nephilim teaching humanity astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, agriculture, describes their cities as reaching the clouds. The massive Tartarian structures, buildings 4, 5, 6 stories tall, stone architecture so advanced it's still standing thousands of years later. The tallest subject told me his name, Helena says quietly. Barakal. Book of Enoch, 69. 8. Barakal taught astrology, one of the 200 watchers, one of the angels who fell. She looks at you. Do you understand? He claimed to be the son of a fallen angel, claimed to have lived before the flood, claimed to remember the world as it was, and his memories matched biblical descriptions perfectly. He described antediluvian civilization, Helena says, cities across Europe, Asia, North America, advanced technology, knowledge that shouldn't have existed, giants ruling over humans, corruption spreading. Genesis 6:5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The flood was judgment, Helena says. Judgment specifically targeting the Nephilim and their corruption. Genesis 6:7, I will destroy man whom I have created. But verse 4 already mentioned giants. The destruction was aimed at them. She opens the Bible to a page she's marked with dozens of notes. But here's what terrified me, Helena says. Genesis 6:4 doesn't just say there were giants in those days. It says, and also after that, after the flood, the Nephilim returned. Numbers 13:33, the Israelites spies in Canaan. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. Deuteronomy 3:11, King Og of Bashan. His bedstead was a bedstead of iron. 9 cubits was the length thereof. 4 meters long, 1 Samuel 17. Goliath of Gath, 6 cubits and a span. 3 meters tall. The biblical record is clear, Helena says. The Nephilim survived. Either they survived the flood, or the fallen angels bred with humans again, after it. She's shaking now. Barakal told me which happened. He said some of them survived. Scattered, hidden, frozen in ice caves, sealed in underground chambers. Waiting to be He said there were more, Helena whispers. More like him, dozens, maybe hundreds, preserved in ice across the mountains of the world. In the Himalayas, the Andes, the Rockies, everywhere the flood waters reached but couldn't completely destroy. She closes the Bible. I wrote a 200-page report, documented everything, cross-referenced every biblical mention of giants, every apocryphal text, every linguistic pattern. My conclusion was unambiguous. These subjects were Nephilim, offspring of the Watchers, survivors of the flood who were frozen and preserved. She pulls out a second document, handwritten 60 pages, but I also documented what they told me about the others. She says, coordinates, locations. Barakal described 23 sites, places where more of his kind were hidden, sealed in ice, waiting to wake up. The weight of that revelation sits between you. 23 more sites, 23 more locations where Nephilim might still exist. Frozen, preserved, waiting. Dr. Volkov took this document personally, Helena says, locked it in a safe with my main report, told me I'd done excellent work, told me I'd be compensated, told me to return to Leningrad and never speak of this. Her hands shake when she pours tea. They fired me from the university 3 months later, accused me of mystical thinking contrary to scientific materialism, blacklisted me. I couldn't teach, couldn't publish, couldn't work. She was 32 years old. Her career was over. But I kept my notes, she whispers, private copies. Everything all 23 locations, because this was too important. If the Nephilim were real, if they built those cities, if the flood destroyed them, if more of them exist, she looks at you. Then everything we think we know about human history is wrong, and something far more dangerous is still out there. There's someone else who was at Institute 47, someone who wasn't a scientist or a nurse or a linguist, someone who saw what happened from the inside of the system that destroyed it all. Major Alexei Kozlov was military intelligence, GRU, not KGB. He was assigned to Institute 47 in January 1967 as a security liaison. His job was to monitor the research, assess its strategic value, report to Moscow. He's 85 now, lives in a small house in southern Kazakhstan. Agreed to speak only because he's dying. Cancer. 6 months left, maybe less. I thought it was weapons research, he says. His voice is rough. Damaged from decades of smoking, biological weapons, chemical agents, something classified. That's what GRU does. He arrived at Institute 47 on January 15, 1967. They briefed him in Dr. Volkov's office, showed him the subjects, showed him the preliminary findings. I didn't believe it, Kozlov says. Thought it was some kind of test, psychological evaluation. See how I'd react to insane scenarios. But it wasn't a test. They took me to the basement, showed me the 3 beds, showed me the subjects. He's quiet for a moment. I'd seen a lot in the military. Combat, interrogations, things that should have prepared me. But nothing prepares you for that. 3 giants, breathing, speaking, remembering things from 4,000 years ago. The tallest one looked at me, Kozlov says, made eye contact, and I felt it. Something old. Something that had seen empires rise and fall. Something that remembered when the world was different. He lights a cigarette despite the oxygen tank beside his chair. I called Moscow that night, told them what I'd seen. They told me to monitor, document, report, nothing else. But Kozlov did more than monitor. He read the reports, listened to the recordings, talked to the researchers. Dr. Markov showed me the genetic analysis, he says. Showed me markers that didn't match any human population. Showed me bone density readings that suggested these beings could live for centuries. He taps ash into a tray. Dr. Resnick played me the linguistic recordings. I don't know languages. But even I could hear it, the way they spoke. Like the language itself was older than the languages we use today. And then Helena showed him the biblical connections. She gave me a copy of her preliminary findings. Kozlov says, 20 pages. Cross-references between what the subject said and biblical texts. I'm not religious. Was raised atheist. But the connections were impossible to ignore. Genesis 6. The Nephilim. The flood. The angels who fell. I reported everything to Moscow. Kozlov's detailed findings. Requested guidance. The response came on March 15, 1967. Terminate the project. Eliminate all evidence. Silence all witnesses. Use any means necessary. Kozlov's hands shake when he stubs out the cigarette. I knew what that meant. I'd carried out termination orders before. Political enemies. Security threats. But this was different. These were Soviet scientists. Loyal citizens. People who discovered something extraordinary. He didn't want to do it. But orders were orders. The KGB took over on March 20th. Colonel Petrov arrived with a team. 6 men. Specialist in making things disappear. Kozlov was reassigned, transferred back to Moscow, told to forget everything he'd seen at Institute 47. But I kept one thing, he says. He reaches into a drawer, pulls out a file folder. Old, stained, marked with classification stamps that were obsolete decades ago. Dr. Volkov gave this to me the night before Petrov arrived. Told me to hide it. Told me someone needed to preserve the truth. The file contains photographs, 12 of them. The subjects, the beds, the researchers measuring, documenting, analyzing, and one photograph that shows something else. That's from the Altai cave, Kozlov says, where they found the subjects. The geological team took it before they transported the bodies. The photograph shows the cave, ice, and in the background, partially visible, other shapes, other bodies, still frozen. There were more. The geological team reported 9 subjects total. 6 of them were too damaged to transport. They left them in the cave. 6 more Nephilim. Still there, still frozen, still waiting. I reported that to Moscow too, Kozlov says. They ordered the cave sealed, dynamited the entrance, buried everything under 300 tons of rock. He coughs. The sound is wet, painful. I'm dying. The cancer's in my lungs, my liver, my bones. Maybe God's judgment, maybe just bad luck. But before I die, someone needs to know what I know. He hands you the file folder. The coordinates are in there. The Altai cave location. The entrance is buried, but the cave system extends for kilometers. There are other entrances, other ways in. He lights another cigarette. And if Helena was right, if there are 23 sites, if more of them exist, he trails off. Then the Nephilim didn't die. They're still here, still frozen, still waiting for someone to wake them up. Section 7 Personal Verification at Anshore 37004300. The facility is abandoned now. Has been since 1973. The main building is accessible, though unsafe. Floors rotting, ceilings collapsed. But the basement ward is concrete, still solid. You're standing where Svetlana stood, where Yuri recorded impossible languages, where Helena documented biblical connections. The air is cold. Your breath fogs. The 3 beds remain. 4 meters long, surgical steel, bolted to the floor. You measure them. 4.1 meters. 4.1 meters. 4.2 meters. Built for beings over 3 meters tall. On the wall, someone scratched something, faded but readable. Hebrew letters. You photograph it. Send it to a translator. The response comes back. Barackle was here. The water came. We sleep. Your hands are shaking. There's someone else here. An old man. He's been watching you from the doorway. He's 78 years old. Lives in a small village 2 kilometers from the facility. He's been the unofficial caretaker since the government abandoned it. I was a janitor here, he says. His name is Victor, 1966 to 1968. Cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, saw things I wasn't supposed to see. He walks to the beds, touches the steel. They were real, he says simply. The giants, I saw them, twice, both times, through the basement window. They were too big, something about them wasn't right. He's quiet for a moment. I heard them talking once. Late at night, I was cleaning the hallway. Their voices came through the door, sounded like stones, grinding, like hearing the earth speak. Victor pulls out a small object from his pocket, a metal fragment. Oxidized. Ancient. Found this in the trash, he says. March 1967. Someone threw it away. I kept it. You examine it. The metal is bronze, but the composition is wrong. No impurities, no modern alloy patterns. Dr. Markov told me it came from one of them, Victor says. Said they had metal fragments embedded in their bones. Said the metal was older than any known bronze working. Bronze Age technology began around 3300 BCE. This metal predates known metallurgy. Matches the Book of Enoch's description of Azazel teaching humans metalworking. After they died, Victor says, men came, military, KGB, cleaned out everything, took the bodies, took the equipment, took the files, burned what they couldn't. He gestures to scorch marks on the concrete walls. They burned documents here. Right here in the basement. I watched from outside, smoke for 2 days. The weight of suppression becomes physical. 13 researchers killed, hundreds of documents destroyed, 3 bodies removed, all evidence eliminated. But they couldn't take the beds, Victor says. Too heavy, bolted down. So they left the only proof that something was here. You measure the beds again, photograph the wall inscription, document the metal fragment, everything that proves the impossible. People come sometimes, Victor says. Researchers, curious people, they measure, they photograph, they leave. Nobody stays. Nobody wants to know what this means. He looks at you. Because if those giants were real, if they were what the scientists said they were, then the Bible was right. And if the Bible was right, about the temperature in the basement is 11 degrees Celsius. Outside, it's 24 degrees. The laws of thermodynamics say this shouldn't be possible, but it is. Has been for 57 years. You set up equipment, thermal sensors, air quality monitors, electromagnetic field detectors. The readings come back strange. Temperature variation, impossible. Air composition, normal, but with trace elements that don't match local atmosphere. Electromagnetic fields, elevated, consistent, pulsing at regular intervals. It's them, Victor says quietly, something they left behind. Even dead, even gone, something remains. The final witness is already dead. Colonel Mikhail Petrov worked for the KGB's department for suppression of religious activity. He died in 2019, age 93. But before he died, he recorded a confession, gave it to his daughter, told her to release it after his death. She did. The recording is 47 minutes long. Petrov's voice is weak but clear. He describes his career, his assignments, the people he silenced, the evidence he destroyed, and then he describes Institute 47. I received orders in March 1967, Petrov says. Highest level. Direct from Moscow. Eliminate all evidence of Project Nephilim. Eliminate all witnesses if necessary. Project Nephilim. That was the classified name for the Institute 47 research. They told me what they'd found, Petrov continues. 3 subjects, giant humanoids, frozen for 4,000 years, speaking ancient languages, claiming to be offspring of angels. He coughs. The recording crackles. I thought it was insane. Thought the scientists had lost their minds. But when I read the reports, he's quiet for a long moment. Everything matched. Biblical descriptions, archaeological findings, linguistic patterns. The scientists weren't crazy. They'd found proof that Genesis 6 was real. Petrov's orders were clear. Destroy, silence the witnesses. Ensure no connection between the Soviet findings and biblical texts ever became public. The subjects died on March 28, 1967, Petrov says. We used potassium chloride, injected directly into the heart. Made it look like organ failure. He murdered them. 3 beings who survived the flood, frozen for 4 millennia, woken by Soviet science, and the KGB murdered them. We removed the bodies the same night, Petrov continues. Transported them to a crematorium in Kazakhstan. Burned them at 1,200 degrees for 6 hours. Then scattered the ashes in the Tian Shan Mountains. Nothing remained. No bodies. No bones. No DNA samples. We destroyed the research over the next 2 weeks. Every document. Every recording. Every photograph. Every tissue sample. All of it burned or shredded. He coughs again. But that wasn't enough. Moscow wanted the scientists silenced. Permanently. The 13 Dr. Volkov, Dr. Markov, the linguists, the biblical scholar, the the geneticists, everyone who knew. We made them look natural, Petrov says. Car accidents, heart attacks, suicides, spread them out over 5 years so no one would see the pattern. His voice breaks. I killed 13 people who discovered the truth. Killed them because the truth was too dangerous. There's a long silence in the recording. The Soviet Union feared religion. Petrov finally says, feared anything that might validate the church. If people knew giants were real, knew the Bible was describing actual events, knew the flood happened, the entire state ideology would collapse. But it wasn't just the Soviets. We coordinated with the Vatican, Petrov says quietly. They sent representatives, told us they'd been suppressing this evidence for centuries, showed us their documentation, Jesuit reports from the 1600s, descriptions of massive structures, giants, everything. The church and the communists, enemies in every other way, united in suppressing the Nephilim evidence. Both sides feared the same thing, Petrov says. If the Nephilim were real, if Genesis 6 was literal history, then people would start asking questions about the flood, about judgment, about what comes next. He pauses. You can hear him crying. There's something else, Petrov says, something I've never told anyone. After we destroyed the Institute 47 evidence, Moscow gave me another assignment. The recording crackles with static. The biblical scholar, Helena, she documented 23 other sites, locations where more Nephilim might be frozen. Moscow wanted those sites secured. Petrov spent 3 years traveling. Himalaya, Andes, Rockies, Caucasus, Alps. Every mountain range where glaciers held ice from before the flood. We found 4 of them, Petrov says. 4 other sites with frozen subjects. We sealed them, buried the entrances, posted military guards at remote coordinates, told the soldiers they were guarding geological hazards. 4 more sites, 4 more locations with Nephilim, still frozen, still there. I don't know if the other 19 sites exist, Petrov says. Helena's document was incomplete. Barako only remembered some of the locations. But I know those 4 are real. I stood in those caves, saw the bodies, saw the ice. He's silent for a long moment. I'm 93 years old, he says. I'm dying, and I need someone to know what I did, what we all did. We destroyed proof that the Bible was real. We killed people to hide the truth. We buried evidence of beings that connected humanity to something beyond ourselves. The recording continues. And somewhere in those mountains, frozen in ice that's been there for 4,000 years, more of them wait. More Nephilim. More proof. More truth. His breathing is labored. I don't know if God exists. But if he does, I'll face him soon. And I'll have to explain why I murdered his witnesses. The recording ends with Petrov crying, repenting, begging forgiveness from a God he never believed in. You're back at Institute 47, back in the basement where it all happened, where 3 Nephilim woke up after 4,000 years, where Soviet scientists documented biblical truth, where the KGB erased everything. The beds remain, 4 meters of surgical steel, bolted to concrete, the only physical proof that something impossible was here. Svetlana is 91 now, still remembering, still carrying the weight of what she saw. Yuri is 87, his notebook filled with a language from before Babel. Helena is 89, her biblical cross-references proving the connection. Kozlov is 85, dying, his file folder preserved. Victor is 78, guarding empty rooms where giants once breathed. And Colonel Petrov is dead, his confession released, his guilt recorded, his crimes admitted. 13 people died to suppress this. 13 people who documented the connection between Tartarian civilization and biblical Nephilim, between massive structures and Genesis 6, between ancient giants and the flood. What we know, 3 beings were found. 3 beings over 3 meters tall. 3 beings who spoke a unified language from before the Tower of Babel. 3 beings whose DNA showed genetic markers consistent with biblical descriptions. 3 beings who claimed to be offspring of fallen angels. What we don't know, how many others exist. Whether Helena's 23 sites are real, whether Petrov's 4 sealed caves still hold frozen Nephilim. What technology the Nephilim possessed. Why both the church and communists feared this truth so completely. What happens if more of them wake up? What was destroyed? Bodies, cremated and scattered, documents, burned and shredded, tissue samples, incinerated, recordings, erased, photographers, destroyed, except 12, except the ones Kozlov preserved. What remains? 3 beds, 1 wall inscription, 1 metal fragment, 4 elderly witnesses, 1 confession, 1 file folder, coordinates to caves that might still hold proof, and the massive structures, spanning continents, built with technology that shouldn't have existed, built by hands that shouldn't have existed, built by the Nephilim before the flood came. Genesis 6:4, there were giants in the earth, in those days and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. They were real. They built Tartaria. They spoke to God. They remembered the world before judgment, and the governments of earth killed them again. The basement is cold, will always be cold. The temperature drops in places where impossible things happened, where beings from before the flood woke up, where biblical truth became scientific fact, where 13 people died for knowing. Victor still guards this place, still keeps the metal fragment, still remembers their voices like stones grinding. Someone needs to know, he says. Someone needs to remember that they were here. The beds remain, bolted to the floor, 4 meters long, built for giants, built for Nephilim, built for proof that Genesis 6 was real. And somewhere in the mountains, in caves sealed by governments, in ice that's been there since the flood, more of them wait. The Tartarian giants were Nephilim, the biblical connection they tried to destroy. But the truth doesn't die. It waits, frozen in ice, bolted to concrete, written in ancient languages, sealed in caves that governments guard. And if Helena was right, if Barackle told the truth, if 23 sites exist, then the question isn't whether the Nephilim were real. The question is, how many of them are still out there?